Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Clayton Noblet, and I work on author communications here at Written Word Media. Thank you so much for joining us today for our latest speaker series session, where we feature world-class and influential speakers on topics most interesting to authors and publishers. You can stay up to date on future speakers by signing up for a free Written Word Media account at writtenwordmedia.com. For today's talk, we are joined by a very special guest, Jane Friedman. Jane has spent nearly 25 years working in the book publishing industry with a focus on author education and trend reporting. She is the editor of the Hot Sheet, the essential publishing newsletter for authors, which was named the 2020 Media Outlet of the Year by Digital Book World. Her latest book is The Business of Being a Writer, which received a starred review from the Library Journal. Today, Jane will be talking about author anxiety and will give some advice on how to spot and avoid writerly self-sabotage. If you have any questions during Jane's presentation, please just leave a comment on the video, and we'll do our best to answer them all at the end of the session. Please welcome Jane Friedman.
Thank you so much, Clayton. It's a pleasure to be here. Now, as Clayton alluded to, I started working in publishing quite some time ago in the mid-1990s. And for the bulk of my career, I've been speaking to writers about the business of publishing. That's what I'm known for, how to earn a living, the money part. But the question that's always fascinated me before I got into the business side, and this goes back to when I was a creative writing student, is who is it that actually keeps writing after you get that degree or after that initial interest? Who's in it for the long haul and why? The longer that I'm in the business, the more that I see how many people, even if they're talented, don't stick it out. They get chewed up by the system and they quit. So to give you an idea of what this looks like in terms of the numbers, and I posted these statistics on Twitter, I would say about a year ago, and I got an overwhelming response to it. So these statistics come from something called the Fiction Database. So it is particular to novels, but I find that the same is true across all categories of books. So according to this database, 80% of published authors stop after 3 books. 10% make it to 6 books, and 5% make it to 12. Now, why is this? And I mentioned I posted this on Twitter, and a lot of people had things to say about this. Some felt like it demonstrated that publishers are evil, or that writing doesn't pay enough, or that ultimately capitalism sucks. It was a litmus test for me in how people see writing and publishing today. You get people saying things like, well, no one reads anymore, or the industry doesn't do its job properly, or people don't pay for art, or they expect things for free, writing's been devalued, or, the internet has ruined everything. There are a lot of things, people, places, situations that we tend to point a finger at. I see these numbers very differently. I think it demonstrates that once you write and publish a book a few times, the romance starts to fade. And it's not this incredible holy grail or amazing dream that people think it is. And you have to really, really want to do it to continue. And whatever anxieties that you have about writing and publishing, whether you're on your first book or your 100th book, I don't think they disappear just because you publish or you get a big advance or whatever it is that you're hoping for. In fact, I think the anxieties tend to increase. So the longer I'm in the business, the more I tend to see it as intensely psychological. I don't think it's a test of writing talent. It's a test of something else. But most of us tend to be obsessed with the talent part. And I include myself in this. When I was a creative writing student, I thought that the students around me, or the people who went on to some sort of success, were vetted or selected in some way because of their innate talent. And when I was a student, I wanted nothing more than my creative writing professors to, to put their hands on my shoulders and to look deep into my eyes and say, yes, you were chosen for this. You're in the right place. You're doing the right thing. I wanted that validation and comfort that I was on the right track and I wasn't going to make a fool out of myself. Unfortunately, no one gave me that message. No one told me, oh yes, you're going to succeed. I mean, no one was mean to me, but no one took me aside and said, you're special. And I think, deep down, a lot of writers are hoping for that, if they're being honest. So fast forward a little bit to my first job in corporate publishing. I was sitting at an exhibit table at the AWP conference. This is an enormous conference with 12,000 writers who attend every year. It's mainly, writing professors and creative writing students, but a lot of established writers go as well. And it's a great place to go if you want to inflame your anxiety. Because you see how many others are trying to do exactly the same thing that you're doing. And so this was on my mind, obviously, at this conference. And I was sitting next to a professor who had been, teaching students for nearly 40 years. And I asked him, and I felt freer to ask him this because he wasn't my professor. I said, can you tell which of your students are going to make it? And he said no, which shocked me because I figured after so much time, surely he has figured out how to pick the winners, right? Instead, he said, some students just keep doing the work after they graduate, and then others don't. Now, once I started to speak at writing conferences, and this is when I began writing or working for Writer's Digest, and I was around writers almost every day, whether that was, on the phone or in the office or at a conference. I started to be seen as some kind of authority myself on whether or not people were going to make it or not, just like I saw my professors as an authority. And some of those writers were brave enough to ask, tell me if I'm wasting my time. Tell me if I have this thing that it takes. Tell me if I have talent. People have lots of words for it. Talent is usually the most common. I've even had writers ask me, please rank me on a scale of 1 to 10 of my writing talent, or if I have what it takes, or if I should keep going. And I have to tell you, I really hate this question. And I started to realize why my professors never said a word as far as, the ranking or any of that. All of this started to become more clear. I don't like being put in that position of having to render a verdict because I don't know. I mean, I can spot talent just fine, but I like that professor who'd been in the game for 40 years. I don't know who's going to keep doing the work. Now, asking someone, do I have what it takes? As I said, most writers actually aren't brave enough to ask that question. We're afraid of what the answer is going to be. And because you're afraid of asking the question, because you're afraid of the answer, I think this actually leads to a focus on other issues, what I call small anxieties. Now, by small, I don't mean unimportant or insignificant. As my image shows here, I think that they look small on the surface, but they can really undercut you before you even get started. We focus on some of these smaller issues because it distracts us from the scarier questions. And I'm going to talk about 2 of these small anxieties that crop up all the time. There are others, but I'll just focus on what I think are the 2 biggest. One is age. When I was a young writer, I thought, I had to succeed by age 25 or it was over. And, as you get older, you start obviously to see how silly that is. Usually, the age issue pops up most frequently with people who are more advanced in age, but I hear it no matter what people's age is. Younger writers have the same hangups. They feel like they're not going to be taken seriously. But, it's so easy to find evidence that you can succeed at any age. E.L. James broke out at 48, Laura Ingalls Wilder at 65, Frank McCourt, 66, with Angela's Ashes, J.R.R. Tolkien, 45, Charles Bukowski, 51, Delia Owens, 69, with her debut novel, Where the Crawdads Sing. And if you look at the New York Times list on any given day, it's full of what I would consider mature authors. So I don't think age is something that ought to be a stumbling block. And moreover, the publishing industry, I think, if you compare it to other entertainment industries, I think is usually more kind, let's say, than Hollywood or some other industries where there's definitely, yes, there's ageism. The thing about writing and publishing, like this meme on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Nobody. When you're querying and submitting a manuscript, nobody has to know your age unless you make it plain, and unless it's relevant, and it almost never is relevant. You don't put your age in the query or in the manuscript, because that's not what the decision is based on. Agents and editors, they look at the writing first, and they're not going to know your age unless you signal it in some way. So the most dangerous thing about age is usually your insecurity or anxiety about it, or a fear that you can't learn new things, or that you can't learn tech, or that you can't do social, or that you can't do X because of this number. And again, I just want to emphasize, I've known authors of every age who have succeeded. So this is when you hear that voice in your head about, well, I'm X number of years old, that's not useful information. That's not helping your writing career. And you just have to recognize it for what it is, which is an unhelpful voice, and set it aside. It will stop you from even trying. It stops you from taking yourself seriously. And you're also internalizing all of this crap about what culture tells us about what people of certain ages can and cannot do. So put it aside. The other small anxiety is submissions, timing, and etiquette. So when should you send that query? How long should it be? What should the font size be? How big, what the margins, like the type of paper when we used to send submissions through the mail. And admittedly, agents and publishers themselves are responsible for stoking some of this anxiety, because they say all sorts of kind of silly things and personal things, very personal things about when and how to submit. And a lot of this advice that they offer you really just comes out of frustration with their own jobs, like of being overwhelmed with material and wishing writers would stop doing X. And so they go on Twitter and they say, stop doing that. I don't like it. And you get a lot of contradictory information because every agent and publisher is different in their personal likes and dislikes. So you have to see some of the advice around submissions etiquette and timing and formatting. You have to see it for what it is, which is just people who are tired and cranky. And I did do a Twitter thread actually satirizing all of this, the way that writers work themselves, like contort themselves into trying to submit at exactly the right time, reading the tea leaves. And if you dig around in my Twitter feed, you'll find my guide to the perfect day to query your book, which I think is what I say. I said September 15th is the best day to query, unless it falls on a weekend or a Monday or a Friday. And if it does, it's best to wait until the following year. So I hope my reason for doing this thread wasn't to make fun of writers, but to make fun of how we turn this into an impossible situation for ourselves. And ultimately, it's a distraction, just like the age is a distraction. After I left corporate publishing, this was around 2010, I ended up working full-time as a professor, and it was the e-media division of a music conservatory, interesting place. And the students coming in had to write, or to apply, they had to write an essay, as you often do. And this was a program where they were training to become storytellers through audio, video. Some of them wanted to be professional musicians, a lot of different goals, but all in an artistic field ultimately. And so when I joined this department, I sat on the admissions committee. And it was a really eye-opening experience because, you read through hundreds of these prospective student essays, and the same sorts of themes tend to repeat themselves. One of the biggest that I noticed is people would say, "Well, this is my passion. This is the only thing I can imagine doing with my life. You must let me in, therefore." Um, but when you start to see the claim again and again and again and again, it starts to become fairly meaningless, especially when you look at the rest of the application and you see like no evidence that they've pursued this passion in any tangible way. Like it's still just a thought in their head and they haven't acted on it. Now, granted, these are young folks, but normally by the age of 18, you would see some expression of this passion in their lives. But there was a good majority that didn't offer any evidence that they'd put in some effort until they made the application. So this started making me feel really, doubtful that passion really had much to do with anything in terms of success or who was going to stick with it. Which brings me to an anecdote. There's a Zen parable about a master violinist, and this master was asked by his young student whether he was good enough to reach maestro standard. And the master thought for a minute and then said, "I think not." Student was immensely disappointed and gave up playing violin. Now, decades later, he happened upon this master again and asked him how he knew that his playing wasn't good enough to reach that maestro level. And the master said, "Well, if you had really wanted to play violin, it wouldn't have mattered what I said." Wow, it hurts to say that every time I tell that story, because we're all seeking at one point or another encouragement, support, validation for what we're doing, and it hits hard when someone doesn't offer it. I always hear stories from writers, often decades after the fact, about how that English teacher or someone in school told them they would never amount to being a good writer. They were otherwise criticized, and some people are able to take that and use their anger or bitterness at being told that and use that actually to sustain them. And if you can do that, great. Other people are crushed and they give up. Now, I think this is these stories that I'm telling are somewhat unique to the path of every artist, anyone who's pursuing a creative endeavor, which largely don't have formulas for success. Creators, take all sorts of different paths. It's not like going to medical school where you know that if you meet all of these particular milestones and you do your 4 years here and then you do your 4 years there, et cetera, you're going to pop out the other side a qualified doctor. There isn't really someone who's going to make you a qualified artist. Same with law, same with business. And so because there's no tried and true path, you don't have these signals that you're doing the right thing or that you've reached a certain milestone. And there's a lot of fear and self-doubt that then enters into the equation. Some people, because they don't get the validation they need, they end up quitting, or they're fearful they're not going to succeed. They're worried about crashing and burning, especially in public. And, there's actually no shame in putting down the violin or deciding this isn't for you. Knowing when to quit is actually just as valuable as knowing when to keep going. And sometimes you do have to quit for a while and maybe come back later. Or you might realize at some point that you're pursuing writing for reasons that maybe aren't the best. And this is where I want to show a New Yorker cartoon that I just think hits this perfectly. this little to-do list that starts with the dream, which is writing your Oscar accepted speech, and then writing the movie that will win the Oscar, and then writing the book that the movie will be adapted from, and then pitching the book idea. And number 5 at the last is have the idea that will spark all of this. So we're often focused on those dreams, but not on the work required to get there. Authors, I think, I'm biased, but I think authors are generally admired in the culture. And, you see authors being admired and held up, and, you think, oh, wouldn't it be cool to be an author? I want to attain that status. I want a movie made of my work. But that tends to be really thin fuel for a writing career. I don't think it can sustain you. That by itself, it's hard to keep going when times are tough. And this, in a very strange way, brings me to Twitter, because during a portion of my career, and I'm still on Twitter, of course, but during a really early on, like in 2009, 2010, Twitter became this really strange obsession of mine. I was just super fascinated by it. I was trying to understand it. And I was actually attempting to catalog all of the tweets related to the writing and publishing community. Like literally, I set up data scrapers because I couldn't be watching Twitter 24/7. So I set up tools to scrape tweets. And then I would like comb through them every week and assemble a list of what I thought were the most valuable tweets for writers. And then I published it at my blog. And I did this for 2 years. It was a ton of work. I can't even explain to you on a rational level why I did this. It was just this weird thing that I did and I repeated because I was unnaturally compelled to do it. But doing that, well, it increased my education in writing and publishing because I was consuming so much content. It made me visible to any number of people on Twitter. I gained an enormous following, as you can see here by the graph, at the time that I ran this experiment. And it actually led to me getting a job offer down the road, which I took. And I ended up on a National Endowment for the Arts grant panel because of this effort. And then, of course, when you have this sort of success that people notice, especially like on social media, then people want you to teach on it. Teach me how to do what you did. And I taught one class focused on Twitter, and I will never teach it again because it's the way I did it and the way I do it today is too unique to who I am. I do consider it like a creative outlet for myself. And I can't, everyone uses Twitter in an entirely different way. And the conditions under which I was successful with this project weren't replicable by anyone else. So all I could tell people about my success was I kept at it even when I didn't know what I was doing. Even when no one cared what I was doing, because it took a while before people even noticed this, I was doing it to satisfy myself. I want to share with you the Helsinki bus station theory. This is a map of the Helsinki bus map, or all of the routes. And you can go read about this more if you like. There's a Finnish person who obviously came up with this theory. And he uses it as a metaphor for any artist's life. He says it's like riding public transit in Helsinki. There's this main station at the center of the map. And if you get on where all of these different routes overlap, there are going to be a lot of people on that bus with you. And you're huge crowds, and you'll go for 3 stops or 4 stops or 5 stops. And you'll notice that the crowds aren't thinning out. Like you're still with this cohort, and none of you seem to be going anywhere unique. And you start to get anxious that you're just doing the same thing that everyone else is doing. And you want to go somewhere special, really special. So you get off the bus and you go back to the center and you try a different line, thinking, well, this must go somewhere better, somewhere more unique, somewhere more special. But actually, You start getting that same anxiety again after 3, 4, 5 stops, and then you get off the bus again and go back to the center, but do you see what's happening? You're just kind of staying in this center circle. You're literally going in circles. So what do you do instead of getting off the bus? Well, you stay on the bus, because if you stay on that bus long enough, the crowds thin out, your own work starts to go somewhere unusual and interesting. But it takes time. You're gonna be on the bus a long time, and there aren't any creative jetpacks that get you all the way out to those northern suburbs, in the map here. And you have to focus on doing your work and give yourself the time to get to where you wanna be and not worry about what's happening all around you. And here I'd like to share a quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has spoken so eloquently about his own career journey. You know, he wasn't a blockbuster out of the gate. He toiled for many years, writing for no pay, until he broke out with, I want to say probably his biggest breakout moment was Between the World and Me, the memoir that he wrote. And so he's been asked, of course, about his career path and its difficulty. And he says that, the path is so tough as a writer, and you get beat up so much that people eventually go to business school and become lawyers, for exactly the reasons I just told you about. But if you find yourself continuing, if you stay on the bus, you'll have a skill set and the competition will thin out. I don't know about any of you, but when I went to high school, there was something called the Presidential Fitness Test. And one of the requirements, if you wanted to pass the test, was to do a pull-up. If you were female, you only had to do one. And I couldn't do it. And I have carried that strange shame with me ever since. And so I was inspired last year at this time to start working with a personal trainer to finally do a pull-up. Spoiler alert, I still can't do one unless I'm assisted with a band. It's really one of the hardest strength training moves you can try to do. But working with the personal trainer was just a fascinating experience because, she, at our initial meeting, of course, she had to sit through me explaining how I wanted to do this, knowing, but not being able to say, unless she was really mean. There's no way you're going to be able to do this like in 3 months or in 6 months. Like I'm sure she knew, and I didn't, that it could well take me a year or more, depending on how much time I was willing to put in. And when I started this journey, I was living in Virginia, and I eventually had to part ways with her because I moved to Cincinnati. And when we parted ways, I had kept doing the work, but it wasn't quite enough to be able to do a pull-up on my own. But she said, I did admire how you put in the work. Like, you showed up with me, and then you did some work on your own, and you have made tremendous progress. And so I felt good about that. And then at the same time, serendipitously, I started reading a newsletter by Casey Johnston, who is both a writer and a female weightlifter. She has some really entertaining stuff. If you go find her on Instagram or subscribe to her newsletter, it's called She's a Beast. It's pretty cool stuff. Even if you have no interest in the topic, she's fun to read. She's writing a book right now, in fact, and she recently tweeted that writing a book is basically a feat of strength of not doing other things. And, here's this female weightlifter who can do so many more pull-ups than I can, saying that writing is hard, that it's a feat of strength. And it is. Okay, so I want to talk in a little more pragmatic terms about what to do if you want to stay in the game, because it does require dealing with anxiety. It's not going to go away. There's probably always going to be some low level. It's your dark passenger. And so you have to learn how to negotiate, compromise, give it a space, but don't let it drive. Don't let it drive the bus. Okay, so first, consider small steps, small bets, little bets, rather than giving yourself a goal that is so huge that you're setting yourself up for failure. I don't know why writers torture themselves with these ginormous goals that will, require them to suffer to meet them. So, for instance, instead of giving yourself the first writing goal of writing and finishing a memoir, how about a personal essay first? Or if you're learning to write fiction, how about trying some fan fiction first? That's what young writers do, and I think it's brilliant. Um, how about writing and finishing a single novel before you plan a trilogy? Some of this is common sense, but sometimes we we don't realize the difficulty of what we're proposing, just like I didn't realize the difficulty of the one pull-up. An imperfect step forward is better than circling the black hole. There is never the right time to get started on that project. There is never the right time to find the time. It's just the perfect moments never arrive. So you have to decide how to imperfectly move forward, whatever that looks like for you. And this is similar to making the small bets rather than demanding that you give 150% at the beginning. Writing is a muscle. I'm sorry, I'm bearing down on these exercise metaphors, but they're true. Writing is a muscle and you train it over time. So be gentle with yourself. It's also quite important who you surround yourself with. So if you're in a writing group and every time they convene, they're complaining about how unfair the industry is, or there's just a lot of bitterness or resentment or whatever, consider finding a new group. You want to be with a group that works towards improvement, celebrates victories, looks at the small steps. You don't want the groups that are only focused on the complaining. Now, there are always going to be negative emotions. I think, as I've kind of mentioned, the anxieties there. There are also other negative emotions that come into play, like jealousy, professional jealousy of other writers. And rather than let it control you, let it flow through you, as the emperor might suggest, and focus it on producing writing. And you can find great writers who suggest exactly this. I'll mention one, Billy Collins, who is the former poet laureate of the United States. He once said, "You're looking to get influenced by people who make you furiously jealous. Read widely, find poets that make you envious, and then copy them. Try to get like them." You read a great poem in a magazine somewhere and you can't stand the fact that you didn't write it. What do? You can say, okay, I didn't write that poem. Let me write a poem like that. That's my version of it. And that is how writers grow. I think in other artistic industries, you're often told to replicate what other people's performances, to mimic the ballet dancer, to mimic that musician, because that's how you learn. In writing, we don't do enough of that. Now, here's a really critical point. You have to ignore a lot of nonsense that's out there. So, like how to become a morning person sorts of advice, or how to write every day, or how to write 500 words in 15 minutes. There's so much life advice out there telling you how to be morally better or improve your productivity. Why going outdoors makes you smarter, stronger, and more spiritual. How to vacation like a pro. Like, we're now even demanding that our vacationing be professional and productive. It's sad that our anxiety can get triggered by this, but it does. And part of this is, if you're scrolling through social media, you probably know these sorts of headlines that I'm talking about. Do not click on them. Do not click on them. Now, this might sound strange coming from someone who essentially works in in kind of like advice giving. And I'm not against, advice giving or self-help or prescriptive nonfiction. It can be deeply meaningful. But you have to also recognize when it's causing you endless anxiety. And it took me until my 30s to realize it was okay that I preferred not to get up until 9 a.m., that I prefer to be indoors, and I want to wake up with, basically a coffee cup in my hand. That's okay. That's how I do it. And you're going to find your own way too. All right. I have another video to show, but fortunately, this one does not require audio. So I'm going to go ahead and let it play here right in the slideshow. Watch close. Okay, I think you get the idea. The video continues for another few heart-stopping minutes. That's a very famous climber who is free climbing, El Capitan. Um, he is still alive, fortunately. A lot of people wonder how does he do that? Like, obviously, it takes technical skill to do it, but it also takes it seems like it takes psychological fortitude to be able to do that. Um, and, when a video like this comes out or there's this superstar like this, what always happens afterward? People start writing articles about how you too can be like Alex and face down your fears or, be crazy and free climb El Capitan. Um, but comparing ourselves to what might come naturally for others is the road to hell. Um, they actually scanned this guy's brain while he was doing these dangerous activities. I don't know how they managed this. Um, and they found that when he's in these positions of extreme danger, like life-threatening danger, there are areas of his brain that should light up that don't. For a normal person, they would be freaking out, like, do not do this, danger, danger. And his brain doesn't do that. Always remember this. When you see people telling you, oh, it'll be so easy for you to behave like this amazing other superstar. There's probably reasons why they're able to do it. And there might be reasons that you shouldn't. Pivoting a little bit here, I want to mention one of my favorite authors, Alan de Botton. He's a UK-based author. He's not all that well known in the US, but he's just marvelous. I love his books. He runs something called the School of Life. One of his most popular articles of all time, you can find it in the New York Times. It's called Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. And this is the illustration that was used. And it's basically an article about the reasons why we end up marrying people who aren't all that great for us, or we might be placing really huge expectations on the relationship or the marriage. We have these dreams, and we expect a very human person to live up to these dreams. And he says in the article, it might sound odd, but pessimism relieves the excessive imaginative pressure that our romantic culture places upon marriage. So, the key to happiness then is to lower your expectations, and however low they are now, put them just a little bit lower. And that's just about right. Alan de Botton's message again and again, which I love, I don't know, it's just the sort of person I am, I guess, is that unhappiness and disappointment is intrinsic to being human. To share another Zen parable with you, there was a monk who spent years giving spiritual talks, and as he got older, he got more and more candid, which happens to a lot of us. And in one famous talk, he asked the audience if they'd like to know his secret. And he said, look, I don't mind what happens. Period. I mean, that's the best trick of all. if you can pull it off. I'm not there yet because I am not a Zen master. But if and when you can reach that point, that is a great trick. For the rest of us are a little bit like Miss Kitten. Now, Miss Kitten is not my cat. She belongs to a friend of mine, and I was doing some cat sitting when I took this photo. Miss Kitten has a problem of crying at all hours of the night. Drove my friend insane. She was losing sleep. And she went to see the vet about this issue. And the vet said, well, the cat probably experienced some kind of trauma early in its life, and it never learned to self-soothe. And I thought, what a remarkable concept, because I think there's a direct parallel to the writing life. Each of us as writers has to develop that skill, the skill to self-soothe when something is not going right, when we experience that disappointment or when there's anxiety. So how do you do it? I mean, this is very individual. Hemingway turned to the bottle. I do not recommend that. But think about rituals that you can turn to. I had a professor who literally took to bed after a rejection and gave herself a certain amount of time to mope around before then she had to get back to work. Some people will retreat into a community or a trusted writing partner. Pets, I think, always help. They keep things real. So we're getting towards the end here. I just want to tell a little bit of the truth about my journey as a creative writing student. There are some professors, like this professor, Dr. Bear, with whom you're always a student and they're always the professor and you love it that way. And whenever I go into New York City, I always have dinner with him and it's always a pleasure. And about 10 years after my graduation, when I was, with Dr. Bear talking about, just, life and everything, he just out of the blue popped out, oh, you were the most talented poet in my class. I really wish you were still writing poetry. And I was like, why didn't you tell me 10 years ago? Maybe I would have kept doing it, right? But he was right to not say that at the time. I'm very glad he didn't do it, because when I was young, I was hugely impressionable and I admired and respected him so much. I wanted to please him so much. And that would have been a terrible reason to continue in poetry. I mean, I only liked poetry, actually writing it, because I took his class, because he made it fun and enjoyable. And then once I left his class, I totally forgot about it. He was like the magic elixir that made it work for me. So this just wasn't something I was excited to pursue unless he was around, and that it wasn't tenable for me to stay by his side. So what I'm saying here is whatever writing you choose to do, you have to like doing it. The number one ranked tennis player in the world, I believe, is Novak Djokovic. And he said, I can carry playing on at this level because I like hitting the ball. And someone asked him, are you saying there are players who don't like hitting the ball? And he said, oh, yes, there are people out there who don't have the right motivation. You don't need to talk to them. I can see it. And so I feel like over my 25 years in the industry, I've figured out some answers to who stays in the game. It's not talent. It's not about someone anointing you. It's not passion. It's not about being the first or even about being original. It's about finding the thing you love to do for its own sake, especially those compulsive things that you do. Like me and my Twitter project was this weird compulsive obsession. And you dial that up. You look for those weird things that you do that no one else does, and you crank that up as much as possible, because that's how you massively outperform other people who don't like hitting that particular ball. And I think a lot of the career advice that you hear is basically extended commentary on this truth. You have to like hitting the ball again and again and again. And if you like hitting the ball, it's a gift. And it lasts you your entire life. That inner satisfaction of hitting the ball keeps you going, and no one can take that gift away from you, and it's not going to let you down. All right, I have reached the end, and I left some time for questions.
All right, thank you so much, Jane. That was so enlightening. I think like yeah, what one of my takeaways just personally from your talk is that it seems like so much of this is about knowing yourself, right?
Yes.
And like that like turns out to be much more difficult to do than you might suspect.
It is very difficult.
Yeah, it seems like a big key to this. Let me go through here and get some questions here. Well, early on, Elaine was saying that she you were listing off kind of the how old people are when they publish. Now there's no kind of like set age or time when people publish their books. And she actually corrected this to say that she loves the late bloomers list.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah, I think that's so true. I see that all the time with authors, and I think outside of authors too, just comparing ourselves to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, the comparison trap is real. But it's great when you can find someone who inspires you. I would never discourage people from finding models or inspiration. There's one woman in particular who, unfortunately, is no longer with us. But I just took such great inspiration from her words. You can actually find her at my YouTube channel. I interviewed her. The interview is called "It's Not Too Late," Q&A with Martha Woodruff. So I'll put her name into the chat here so you can go look for it. She just is delightful in how she talks about how to stay in the game.
Excellent. Great. Let's see here. We've got one here from Ryan. Hi, Jane. Do you have any tips on managing career envy?
I mean, sometimes it helps to know that everyone has it. And I do literally mean everyone. So it doesn't matter what stage you've reached. It's just human nature to always look at what you're not getting, the attention you're not receiving, the review you wanted but didn't get, the advance or agent or publisher you wanted but didn't get. And so just knowing that it's common can sometimes, I think, help. I don't know that you can necessarily, managing it, I guess, is the correct term because you're not going to stamp it out. But something else you can try to do, this isn't always feasible, but if the person you're envious of is sort of a colleague or peer or maybe a couple steps ahead of you, try to start a relationship. Instead of seeing them as a competitor, or you may or may not see them as a competitor, can you collaborate or can they be a mentor? Look for relationship building in those situations. Now, there are some authors who are great and open to building relationships and being mentors and being supportive. Others not so much. So you'll quickly figure out whoever your envy person is, you'll quickly find out what sort of person they are, I think. But I think one of the ways to start the ball rolling there is if you're both on the same social media platform, start commenting or asking them questions, supporting their work visibly, and be a fan and see where it goes.
Great advice. So MG says, so we don't need to worry about the writing to market advice that is constantly tossed out there. Where do you stand on the writing to market position here, Jane?
Well, it really depends on your goals. So there are some professional writers who truly treat it like a 9-to-5 job, like they are on a production line. And they're only going to spend their time writing things that they know has an audience. That's how I see write to market, that you're a craftsperson and you're going to craft this thing that fits into this space for these particular readers. Nothing wrong with that. But not every writer is interested in going down that path. So if you can totally toss the write to market advice and just follow your own muse or decide what you want to produce, realizing that there are trade-offs or compromises, that it often takes longer to find your readership. You often have to stay in the game longer to figure out who you're going to appeal to. So the other thing I would add on to this is there's a really great essay by Paul Graham I think the title is How to Do What You Love. I'll put Paul Graham's name in the chat here. I think it's How to Do What I may be getting the title wrong, but it's a really famous essay, so I think you'll stumble on it if you just do some Googling. He mentions in there about how people chase status and prestige, which makes them do things that they don't actually like, but that it's possible to make something prestigious and that's something that lends you status simply by being excellent at it. And excellence is contagious. So if you aren't going down the right to market path, but you're worried about doing something that isn't prestigious or it's not accepted or not recognized, give yourself time. Think about Rupi Kaur, probably the most famous Insta poet. She posted her poems on Instagram starting in 2012 before anyone knew there was such a thing as an Insta poet before, and she made that into something that's highly admired, at least in my book.
Gotcha. All right, we'll try to get through a couple more here before we wrap up. We got a couple more minutes. Let's see here. How do you recommend moving to a more positive writing group who perhaps might be on the same leg of the publishing ladder as you with imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way or the expeditious to prevent bad match is to go to in-person writing events, writing workshops and conferences, particularly where, like, if you're focused on a particular genre, like let's say it's mystery, look for the mystery writers, chapter groups, conferences, workshops, and events, so that you're getting people who have similar goals to you. I really value in-person for this because even if you continue virtually, having that in-person, like you're just able to see, are we going to be simpatico? Is this going to work out? You might bond over a common experience at the conference. So it just helps get the ball rolling. If that's not really possible for you, then virtual events like this one, or workshops, classes where, especially if there's a smaller group of students, like 10 to 30 students, you almost always find kindred spirits in those classes, especially if they're focused on something. Like how to do a better plot or how to do X, because everyone's facing the same challenge that you are. And so you're likely to find like-minded people who are, in that same leg of the publishing ladder. So I guess my answer in short is go to events, virtual or in person, to find the people.
Right. Excellent. All right. So I think that is about all we have time for today. Jane, thank you so much for your inspiring talk and excellent advice here, as always. For those of you who want to learn more about and from Jane, you can find her at janefriedman.com or at Jane Friedman on Facebook and Twitter. If you'd like to sign up for her publishing industry newsletter, The Hot Sheet, you can sign up at hotsheetpub.com. If you liked today's content, please sign up for a free Written Word Media account at writtenwordmedia.com. And yeah, once again, we're the book marketing hub for authors. We'd love to have you join our community. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.